Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Genie here, aka Mustached, here to review the movie Ralph Breaks the Internet. So, uh, I might have, or probably didn't, I don't know when the first movie came out at this point, so I don't know if I reviewed the first Ralph movie. So I'll say I really thoroughly enjoyed that movie, just to be just to make sure if I didn't review it, I wanted to make sure you guys knew my thoughts going into that first movie. Anyways, welcome to this review where I talk about why I personally don't think this sequel is all that good. In fact, I would argue that as a sequel, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense unless I miss something very major. Nonetheless, before I get to why I think this movie falls apart, let's talk about the things that happen in the beginning and move through chronologically via boring old recap that I'm sure no one likes to see, and spoilers avoid, or ahead, or whatever word I want to use. So, Ralph and Vanellope are talking and chilling around the various different games at night. They're playing in different games like Tron and so on and so forth. And the thought occurred to me initially when I was first watching this was, isn't this what was against, like, the arcade law or whatever? But I guess since they were doing it at night, that was not an issue. So I was like, okay, fine. I was like, sure. So anyways, the video game characters see that this Wi-Fi plugin is connected, but it is initially blocked off because it's a new thing, and apparently new things should be feared automatically. So these players come by Vanellope's game and they begin to play her game. And she had talked about in their little talks that she was getting a little bored of her games, or her game, and that the little sessions she's been having are the same over and over again. So, to put it another way, she's initially taking the role that Ralph did in the first movie. He was tired of being the villain over and over again and wanted to try something new. So now it's Vel's turn, or Vanellope. I just called her Vel in my notes for short. So now she's the one tired. She's the one who wants to try something new. So Ralph decides to, in his own way, you set a new path for her. I'll just keep calling her Vel, just because that name's a lot shorter and easier to say. So Vel decides that she's gonna take this new path, but that is in the course of while the player is in control. So she's essentially now fighting against the player, and in this kerfuffle, the controller of the device breaks. So the kids all use the internet to show that this item to get a new steering wheel to play the game would only cost $200. I think that was the price. Now, maybe it's just me, and I don't know, like, what era this movie takes place in. Maybe it's supposed to be modern, which is why the arcade is struggling to make that kind of money. But, arcades used to make a lot of money. I'm just saying, if this arcade is around and, you have games where you're, like, shooters in particularly, arcades secretly make a lot of money, guys. I don't know if you knew that, but they used to make a lot of money. So again, I'm gonna chalk that one up to that this movie takes place, obviously, in the modern era, and that this particular store is catching up to that modern era. None of that is really spelled out. You just kind of have to put that piece together. Um, so, in the process of not being able to chalk up $200, Sugar Rush, the game, gets unplugged. Vel and her little racers are now homeless. So Fix-It and his wife, whose name I can't remember at this juncture, so yeah, I'll just refer to her as that. Not that those two have any significance in this movie whatsoever, since they only appear here at the end of the movie. So remembering their names isn't all that relevant anyways, but nonetheless, the racers go to live essentially with Fix-It and his wife. And of course, in that process, Vel also feels lost. So, as that's going on, Ralph waits at the bar game for Vel, which has kind of a terrible implication when you think about it. I mean, geez, technically, by this movie's definition, a child, and she was in there previously with Ralph drinking beer? They were in a beer store, a beer game. Did no one ever think, that's a bit wrong? She's underage. She shouldn't do, underage drinking's pretty bad, Disney. I thought you were trying to avoid the bad stuff, but okay. That was the first rather questionable thing, and it's so minor that I'm surprised no one else picked that up. So, at least up from the reviews I've seen so far. Yes, I've seen reviews before making this one. Ooh, I'm so breaking the rules of reviewers. Ooh. Comment and yell at me. I'll get to that one later. Anyways. So, instead of Vel, Ralph gets joined by Fix-It, who talks about suddenly having issues about raising those kids. And in the process, during their talk, Ralph has a brain idea of the store, or the online store, eBay, to purchase the item himself. So, he gets the idea to move to the internet. And so, him and Vel sneak in, and they work their way inside, and the internet gets turned on to them, where they see the various product placements, Snapchat, Amazon, and they meet a search engine. Now, I'm sure that search engine had a name, but for God's sakes, I'm just gonna call all of the apps that they meet by the apps that I recognize them as, because that's all I saw when I was watching this movie. As I didn't see characters, I just saw their online applications, and that's about all they were. So, they see, as they're traveling, other various behind, off to the side things, like another version of Twitter and stuff of that nature. And Ralph sees all these pop-ups, and he's getting distracted. One of them in particular, which ends up becoming a little bit more important later on, is this video game pop-up. Essentially, play games to make money. So, they go into this auction where they see the item that they're trying to purchase. And the two of them, in their stupidity, way overpriced what the thing had originally cost. I'm talking about there's one other person there competing for the item, and he said a pretty low standard price, and the two of them went way above and beyond. By the way, I think what they ended up paying wasn't enough. I think they made a grave mistake. Unless I'm misremembering the numbers that they shouted out, I think they went above 17,000 and they ended up getting 40,000 later on. I think that was the price. I think it's right. I don't know. Numbers, whatever. What is important is that they have 24 hours to get this item, and reasonably enough, Vel starts to freak out. So, Ralph gets the idea to go to that video game pop-up I mentioned earlier, and he travels with them. So they see a list of items they can retrieve to essentially get paid, and they get to this car that's, as I said, that particular car is like $40,000. I don't remember not if that was enough money, but whatever. I'll just assume it is. So they move to this online game called Slaughter Race. And the two of them meet, I believe her name was Shay? I kept calling her Lou for some reason in my notes, but whatever. Shay it is. So she talks to her crew after kicking these two online players' butts, and she's getting ready to, like, just relax, and Ralph goes in for this distraction while Vel gets the car and drives off. The two of them get chased in a pretty decently long chase scene, and Vel glitches ahead, but Shay uses her natural super good skill to drive through. So, the two of them get cornered, and she talks to them about, you can't have the car, but there is another way you can make money, and this way to make money is called BuzzTube with 3 Z's. It's essentially YouTube. Let's not kid ourselves here. Every indication spells out that this is just not even that, also secretly YouTube. So they say that YouTube is a way to make money, which in this day and age, yes, it is now. But of course, if anyone knows, YouTube has a lot of issues when it comes to paying their YouTubers, so we'll get to that. So they have run down to 8 hours, and thus they now meet the character who I'm just going to call the Algorithm. So, the YouTube Algorithm, her full name, that I'm going to refer to her as always, is a person that is fixated on the current trends. And YouTube, as we know, has a tab dedicated to things that are trending and not to the smaller YouTubers and community of smaller channels and newer channels, because fuck smaller YouTubers, right, YouTube? So, this character is only dedicated to what's trending, what's popular, what's big, what's popping. So, in a rather kind of smack to YouTube's face, this character says they clearly don't have time for everyone, and explains that hearts that they are receiving are money, which isn't true, but for the sake of this movie, I'm wanting to let that one go too as well, even though that one doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because it's simply not true. It's actually how much time is spent watching the thing now these days, and people probably get paid more on Patreon than they do on YouTube. By the way, I have a Patreon page, just saying. So they only get $43 in comparison to the $40,000 that they need. And to their dismay, the trend is already starting to fade. But Ralph indicates a plan to essentially copy every other trend and put himself over it, including old dead memes such as the return of the goat, which I mentioned in one of the previous movies was an old dead meme in that movie as well, and here it is trending up again in an old dead movie already. Whoops. So, yes, with all this process, Ralph does indeed begin to trend again, does a meme dance, literally, does some various other arts in this montage. So they plan to use other bigger sites, such as, I believe it was Snapchat or something else. Anyway, it doesn't really matter which sites they were trying to get to. So Vel goes and proceeds to be a pop-up herself, and she's moved from Ralph to be this pop-up, but she's moved to Ralph's desired location, which is this Disney castle. There we probably see more crossover than, or as equal crossover as the first movie, seeing various Marvel characters from Iron Man and the Stormtroopers to the 7 princesses and their familiars, to even on a bittersweet note, a Stan Lee cameo, rest in peace, and Zootopia with the main character, well, one of the 2 main characters, Nick Wilde. So Vel goes into this princess room, and they do this actual Batman transition into the next scene, where Ariel starts to sing about what she wants, and then they discuss Disney tropes, and to everyone's credit, yes, I will also agree that this is probably the best part of the movie, is Disney poking fun of itself, essentially saying that, yeah, most of these Disney princesses have this issue with them, except for 2 of them, one of which is not even a princess, technically, if you actually think about it, Mulan, which is in the movie. If Disney were to remember this, Mulan was a soldier, not... And before that, she wasn't even that. She was just a part of a family. She wasn't, she wasn't anything significant at the beginning of her movie, but she became a soldier. She did not become a princess. She's technically not a Disney princess. So there's that character to break the mold, even though she's technically considered a Disney princess. And that one always kind of bothered me because she's clearly not a Disney princess, but whatever. The other one that kind of breaks the mold, at least in the characters presented here, was obviously the character from Brave, whose name I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. Was it Merida? I think it's Merida. But she only has one line in this movie, I think. Yeah, they had a whole thing about her in the initial trailer, which, by the way, there are a lot of other things in the trailers that aren't even in this movie at all, by the way, if you were curious about that. So there's that. So, after all that lovely, lovely scenery and stuff that is kind of unfortunate, they get a quick visit from R2-D2, who says they need to essentially get back to work. So, Ralph and Vel now have cut down to only 30 minutes left. So, Ralph, proceeding to try to move things along faster, tries to suck up more hearts faster himself, and then he proceeds into this room where he starts to read the comments that he has received on his videos. And at first, they do seem to be positive, but as he proceeds, they proceed to get negative, or as negative as Disney can allow them to get negative. And here's where I'm gonna say it. Ralph, at least you get comments. Yeah, that's right. I said it. At least you get comments. as much as it sucks to get negative comments, there's something far, far worse than getting negative comments, and I'm probably the only YouTuber who's ever gonna tell you this. The only thing worse than getting negative comments is getting nothing on here. Is being a ghost on YouTube, is being irrelevant on YouTube. That is far worse. That is far more shivering and depressing than getting any negative comment. And, you know, as down as that made Ralph, trust me, that is not the worst thing you're gonna see on the internet. Again, I have to reiterate, there's something far worse, and I live it on a more constant basis than not. So I just wanted to rant about that, even though I personally don't think it affects the movie yet. So, anyways, the algorithm talks about the balance of the internet, and unfortunately, this little scene about her talking about balance is so short, and I wish that scene with those two in particular talking about balance actually was a bigger part of the movie, or a bigger scene in the movie, I should say. It's only like, what, 1 to 2, probably 3 lines at most? And that's so unfortunate, because I do think that that could have been a very impactful part of the movie, is talking about that balance. Anyways, so Ralph heads over making the money and all that, and Vel is off with her little, picking up this little phone that they have for each other. And, so, in this part, Vel starts to practice what she has been learning from the princesses about singing and all that, and she starts to sing her own song, and it actually kind of works out for her in her own odd way. And that character we saw, Shay, comes out of nowhere to join her. How did she find her? It's beyond me, but, you can't really make fun of the Disney cliche and then do the Disney cliche and, have it not kind of be more of a, it's just not as funny as if you point it out. Maybe it is to some people, I don't know. So anyways, regardless, Vel had now put Ralph on mute and starts to talk about wanting to stay on the internet. So Ralph calls again, hearing this conversation, as the two, Vel and Shay, are talking about why she wants to stay and what that would mean. But Ralph, in a bizarre turn, thinks she's suddenly brainwashed by this game. Now here's the problem. Now this is where the problems start to suddenly pop up all over the place as soon as he mentions this brainwashed moment. Now, the entire first movie, and up until this point, it is very heavily indicated that these two are supposed to share a friendship bond. However, the moment he starts to say that he's brainwashed and moves towards what he wants to do next, he seems more like a father figure trying to protect his daughter, but that is not the relationship established between these two. So, that is where the problems start to begin, is that it feels like these characters all of a sudden are adapting this whole nother mentality, especially Ralph at this point. Again, feeling more like this obvious father figure rather than a friend. And there is a difference between those two, but I don't think the movie realized that, or the people putting this together. And when you think it can't get any more silly, it does, because Ralph goes to get a virus to infect Shay's game so that uh, Vel can get tired and bored of it because of the virus is making things slower. That is what he wants to happen. So as that's going on, he then talks to the video game pop-up character to get to that location. And Shay's talking about, as we cut back to her, how friendships change, but they don't necessarily die if they are true friendships, that is. So they start to race, and the Vel starts to think she is seeing Ralph, and the virus pops up in this place. Now it scans Vel here, and it indicates that it's based off of insecurities. And here's the biggest problem with this movie is this virus thing. And again, it scans Vanellope and essentially says that her glitching is her insecurity. Did this movie suddenly forget that the first one even exists? And that's the biggest problem with this sequel. I think it suddenly forgot that the first movie existed. Her entire arc in the first movie was about accepting that her glitch was a part of her, that she should embrace it, and she did. So why is it suddenly an insecurity? That makes no sense in what context whatsoever. I'm sorry, but that just comes out of completely nowhere and completely makes the movie fall apart. But it gets even stupider. Oh, it does. So, now that we have that going on, yes, the game that she's in starts glitching around, and Ralph essentially rushes in to save her, and he does, and he so desperately admits the truth. And it is at this point the two of them have their obvious Disney discourse, because of course that part of the movie has to happen, because it's following the Disney cliches. But that's actually what makes the movie fall apart, is that the discourse again comes out of completely nowhere. The virus accepting this, again, it doesn't fit because the first movie exists. So, in her little rant, Vel throws off Ralph's pendant that she had made for him, and then the virus sees Ralph and copies him. It copies his insecurities, which is, the sort of sad state of not accepting oneself and wanting that friend and Vel again. Now, the first part, again, doesn't make any sense, because, again, if the movie had paid attention to the first movie, that first part wouldn't exist, because, again, his entire journey was about accepting himself and coming to that, that pretty good, what's the word I'm looking for, shoot. I had it in my head last night and I lost it today. God, what is the word I am looking for? Essentially, to put it another way, if I can't think of the word, he had found this good balance between what he wanted and what he kind of wanted but didn't get, and what he could have, if that makes any sense. Accepting the fact that he is a villain. Oh, the word is compromise. There we go. Jesus Christ. Ralph was accepting that he had to make a compromise, and suddenly in the sequel, at this point of the juncture, he could not suddenly accept compromise. Again, it feels like this movie suddenly forgot whose Rolf character was, what growth he went through in the first movie, and to me, you know, breaking away from Rolf's compromise is again the only way to make this movie work. The second part, sure, he wants to be friends with Vel. Okay, fine. Um, but again, I think the virus was acting more on the first thing than the second thing, if that makes any sense. Because Rolf was like desperately always pleading and stuff. So, anyway, in this, as I mentioned, uh, Rolf is now cloned, and a bunch of his copies are running around, and they all are chasing after Vel, desperately trying to get her friendship. So, instead of Rolf breaks the internet, which technically happens, it's more so his virus breaks the internet. So it's essentially the virus's fault, the thing that breaks the movie. Haha, breaks. And unfortunately, yeah. So, Vel hides with the search engine, and the real Ralph ends up popping in, somehow finding them. Again, more of that going on in this movie. And, still kind of on Ralph's bad side. But the Ralphs in this process, the clones, all pile on together to make a bigger version of himself. A big monster, if you will. So, Ralph stays behind to essentially attack Monster Ralph, or Big Ralph. I don't know which one I'll call it. I'll just say Big Ralph. And, Val, and from out of nowhere again comes the algorithm to essentially swoop in and help each other. So, as Vel is falling because of this platform breaking, the big Ralph saves Vel temporarily. And Vel is suddenly upset with Big Ralph because she didn't want to get saved. I don't know. Anyway, the real Ralph swoops in and saves her, getting her to safety. But in the process, Ralph is the one that is grabbed. So, in a rather obvious friendship speech, Vel promises to be the big Ralph's friend. And Ralph, in a obvious counter to the obvious friendship speech, goes on to talk about wanting to let go. And in the process of all of this, the big virus goes away, and Ralph proceeds to fall. And the Disney princesses literally come out of nowhere, again, more of the coming out of nowhere cliche, to come in and save Ralph. Kind of, once again, overhanding that woman empowerment movement, kind of like how The Incredibles 2 did. It's not, I would say it's not as bad here, but it's pretty, like, saying, like, yeah, we gotta show that woman power still. Again, I don't have as much as an issue here, but there is something to say at the very most, but I'll save that to the end. So, yeah, they come out of nowhere, they save Ralph, and he's rather thankful for it, so it's totally fine or whatever. And he sits with Vel and they chat off. So he had gotten the pendant at some point, I forgot when, but it's ripped in half, so he gives one half to her and he has one half. And he goes back and he talks to Fix It and his wife, who suddenly are good at parenting magically off screen. Uh, and he proceeds to talk to Vel about the next time they can hang out. And Ralph and Fix It go to proceed to go to their game as the arcade is once again opening, and that is the end of Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet. The first half of this movie is totally fine. It's the moment this virus is introduced when this movie completely falls apart. Again, not realizing what made the first movie work, where the characters were. All of these things are suddenly forgotten to make this entire second half of the movie work. Uh, in regards to the obvious YouTube commentary, I think I've covered that pretty much, saying that YouTube isn't, again, the best place to get paid, and again, I have to reiterate, there's things worse than getting negative comments, and that's getting no comments at all. I live getting no comments, so I trust in my judgment in saying that that is far more depressing than getting any negative comment any day of the week. But again, I don't think that affects me as much as the whole virus thing makes this movie fall apart. Now, in regards to the princesses magically coming in to save the day, it is sort of the obvious of the a something or rather leaving a movie and then coming back into the movie to save the day. And it just so happens to be those princesses we saw from before. Now, I did mention The Incredibles 2, and again, I do feel like that movie was a bit more heavy-handed in the whole female empowerment thing. And the only thing I want to say about that is, I never understood why Disney was doing this ever since that movie. Again, her role in the first movie was fine, and again, I don't think that movie again is at its best. I'm talking about The Incredibles when the family acts as a family unit. It's totally fine to be a family unit. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And I feel like Disney sometimes forgets that. And it's like they're trying to pedestal the whole woman empowerment thing over it. And especially in The Incredibles 2. But luckily, as I said, at the end of that movie, they kind of fix that era that they make of, like, overplaying that card. Here, again, the Disney princesses do their thing. Yeah, them coming out of nowhere is the biggest complaint I can think of. And again, with Ralph being grateful, it's like, it's not that bad, I guess. But again, I think we are far, far past that with especially within some of the Disney princesses, especially the ones that have been coming out recently, have been far better at taking care of their own situations. Even Frozen, it's led by the two sisters or whatever, even though one is having that trouble. And you'll always have Mulan, who, again, her entire deal was about overcoming that obvious sexism and stuff. And that's a movie that came out way before, like in the 1990s or whenever that came out. But anyways, getting back to the modern day princesses, again, you have the characters like Merida, who solve their own problem. Moana kind of has that team up, and again, I feel like that bond is fine. It's totally fine. Again, there's nothing wrong with having a team up and having the other person be a male. Again, I feel like sometimes, again, our main characters are male and female. It's okay to have them on equal terms. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, I don't feel like it's that bad, but it is kind of obvious. It's kind of like, hey, kind of woman, they're doing their thing, um, whatever. That again to me is not as a big a deal. The biggest problem I have with this movie is the introduction of this virus character. Well, it's not really a character. It's more of a bizarre tool that, again, I just feel like completely makes this movie fall apart in the second half of the movie. Again, I feel like the first half is fine, and then the second half just completely shatters the moment this virus is introduced. And I don't feel like they thought that through as well as they could have, because, again, the insecurity part doesn't make any sense whatsoever. If this had been the first movie, I think it would have been fine having that be the issue of them having those be their securities. But again, the first movie exists, so it's hard to say that the second half of this movie works at all. Um, so my score for Ralph Breaks the Internet is gonna be a 5 out of 10. I feel like, again, half of the movie definitely works and it's totally fine. But the second half of this movie, again, it just kind of completely falls apart. And there are other elements that I didn't touch upon, obviously, as much. The comedy, as a the best part is obviously, as everyone else has mentioned, the Disney princess scene. There were other scenes in the trailer that don't even exist in this movie, I should mention. Like the whole bunny thing that I saw doesn't exist in this movie all of a sudden. I almost feel like the people who made this watched the reactions that they were getting and they saw more negative than positive, so they decided to remove that part. I don't know. Uh, that's definitely a possibility. Anyways, in regards to everything else, uh, it's tough to say. It's sort of this in between mess. Again, starts out fine, ends off kind of weird and kind of misguided ever since the virus's introduction. Um, and Vel living on the internet, moving on with her life since their game is shut off anyways. That part to me in itself is fine, but it's how they get there, it just doesn't work. Anyways, that is my review of Ralph Breaks the Internet. Sorry if that was a long one, but I did definitely feel like I had a lot to say in my recap and all the other stuff. So, if you enjoyed this longer review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out that link in the description. I'll head you over to that Patreon page I mentioned. Any donations are greatly appreciated. And always remember, as I said twice over, and I'll end with it, there is something worse than getting negative comments. Always remember that. There's getting nothing. There's getting nothing. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.